The assassination squads arrived at dawn on a Tuesday that would either mark the end of creative sovereignty or the beginning of something far more dangerous than artistic independence. 12 coordinated strikes across 6 continents. Not targeting buildings or infrastructure this time, but people. The leaders, coordinators, and visionaries who had built creative communities that owned their own economic systems. They came for me first. But what they discovered was that after 3 years of systematic betrayal, manipulation, and corporate warfare, I had learned something that no business school teaches and no government manual contains: how to die in a way that makes your ideas immortal. The bullet that was meant to silence the creative sovereignty movement instead became the spark that set the entire world on fire. The assassination squads arrived at dawn on a Tuesday that would either mark the end of creative sovereignty or the beginning of something far more dangerous than artistic independence. 12 coordinated strikes across 6 continents. Not targeting buildings or infrastructure this time, but people. The leaders, coordinators, and visionaries who had built creative communities that owned their own economic systems. They came for me first. But what they discovered was that after 3 years of systematic betrayal, manipulation, and corporate warfare, I had learned something that no business school teaches and no government manual contains: how to die in a way that makes your ideas immortal. The bullet that was meant to silence the creative sovereignty movement instead became the spark that set the entire world on fire. The assault on the Paris Creative District began at 5:47 a.m. with military precision that indicated government-level resources and international coordination. Not police raids or corporate security, but professional elimination teams using weapons and tactics designed for maximum lethality with minimum evidence. I was reviewing applications from creative communities in Southeast Asia when the first explosion shattered my apartment windows. Through the smoke and chaos, I could see similar explosions erupting across the district. Every major creative facility, every community leader's residence, every economic center of artist-owned infrastructure was being simultaneously attacked. "This isn't law enforcement," Marie said, appearing at my door with emergency communication equipment. "This is military action disguised as criminal violence." The communication networks that connected global creative communities were broadcasting similar reports from around the world. The attacks weren't limited to Paris. Creative districts in London, New York, Berlin, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Mumbai, Lagos, Sydney, Toronto, and Mexico City were all experiencing coordinated elimination operations. Someone has decided that creative sovereignty poses enough of a threat to existing power structures to justify international military action, I realized, watching footage of creative facilities burning while emergency responders were mysteriously delayed. But the attackers had made a critical miscalculation about how creative communities had evolved during years of resistance to systematic control. What the elimination teams discovered was that creative sovereignty hadn't created isolated artistic enclaves, but interconnected community defense networks that could coordinate resistance across multiple time zones simultaneously. Within minutes of the first attacks, creative communities worldwide activated emergency protocols that had been developed during the digital platform shutdowns. Not just evacuation procedures, but community protection systems that treated artistic independence as something worth defending with the same dedication that nations defend territorial sovereignty. Street-level coordinators are reporting successful evacuations at 87% of targeted locations, Marie said, monitoring secure communications that operated independently of corporate or government networks. They expected to find isolated artists. Instead, they found organized communities prepared for exactly this type of attack. The footage streaming from attack locations showed something unprecedented: artists defending their creative infrastructure with the strategic coordination of military units and the passionate determination of people fighting for cultural survival. Musicians using sound equipment to coordinate evacuation routes. Visual artists employing installation techniques to create defensive barriers. Writers using communication skills to organize international media coverage of the attacks in real time. They're not just defending creative spaces, I observed, watching live feeds from 12 countries. They're documenting the attacks as they happen and broadcasting evidence to global audiences. The most devastating weapon in the creative community's defense wasn't physical resistance, but informational warfare that exposed who was behind the coordinated elimination attempts. Artists had spent years developing skills in documentation, communication, and evidence presentation. Now those skills were being deployed for survival. Professional equipment, government-grade weapons, international coordination, and systematic targeting of creative independence leaders, reported James Chen from the London Creative District, broadcasting through encrypted networks while emergency services were mysteriously delayed. This is state-sponsored terrorism disguised as criminal violence. The documentation was overwhelming and undeniable. Facial recognition analysis of attackers revealed connections to private military companies that contracted with intelligence agencies. Weapons analysis showed equipment restricted to government and military use. Communication intercepts revealed coordination protocols that indicated official planning and approval. But the most damning evidence is temporal, Marie noted, analyzing attack timelines. Simultaneous operations across 12 time zones require planning resources and coordination capabilities that only exist at the level of international government cooperation. Creative communities weren't just being attacked by business interests trying to regain control of cultural industries. They were being attacked by an international coalition of governments that viewed creative sovereignty as a threat to state power itself. As the immediate crisis continued, Catherine Sterling appeared through secure channels with intelligence that revealed the true scope of what creative sovereignty had accidentally challenged. The coordinated attacks weren't just about controlling artistic expression, they were about preventing creative independence from inspiring other forms of independence. Economic analysis from the past 18 months, she explained through encrypted video communication, shows that creative sovereignty has generated the most successful alternative economic model in modern history. Community ownership, cooperative decision-making, and resource sharing that eliminates both corporate exploitation and government taxation. The financial reports were staggering. Creative districts worldwide had achieved economic sustainability, social stability, and cultural prosperity without requiring either corporate management or government oversight. They had proven that communities could organize complex economic systems independently. That's what makes creative sovereignty a threat to existing power structures, Catherine continued. Not the artistic independence, but the economic independence. You've demonstrated that communities don't need corporate or government control to achieve prosperity and stability. The implications were revolutionary and terrifying. If creative communities could successfully organize independent economic systems, why couldn't manufacturing communities, agricultural communities, or technology communities do the same? Creative sovereignty had accidentally created a template for comprehensive social independence. The attacks aren't trying to eliminate creative communities, I realized. They're trying to eliminate proof that community independence is possible. The intelligence Catherine provided revealed that the elimination operations were being coordinated by something called the Global Stability Framework, a classified international agreement between major governments to prevent the emergence of independent community systems that operated outside state and corporate control. 17 countries, including democracies and autocracies that agree on nothing else, Catherine explained, showing documents that proved coordination between American corporate interests, Chinese government agencies, European Union regulatory bodies, and Russian intelligence operations, all united by their shared fear of community independence. The conspiracy was breathtaking in its scope and sophistication. Intelligence sharing, resource coordination, legal framework development, and operational planning that treated creative sovereignty like an international security threat requiring military response. They've classified community independence as a form of sedition that threatens the fundamental principle of state authority over social organization. But the Global Stability Framework had made a critical error in their analysis of creative communities. They had assumed that eliminating leadership would collapse community organization, when in fact creative communities had evolved beyond hierarchical leadership structures. Look at the response to the elimination attempts, Catherine said, showing real-time footage from attacked creative districts. Instead of collapsing when leaders were targeted, communities are demonstrating distributed leadership capabilities that make them more resilient under attack. Standing in the secure bunker beneath the Paris Creative District, while elimination teams searched for survivors above, I faced the most important decision of my life. 3 years of building creative sovereignty had led to this moment. Either surrender community independence to ensure community survival, or defend community independence with the understanding that defense might require total commitment. They're offering terms, Marie said, relaying communications from Global Stability Framework representatives. Complete dissolution of community-owned economic systems, return to corporate or government oversight of creative activities, and acceptance of new international regulations that prevent community independence, in exchange for ending elimination operations. The choice was between compromise and resistance, survival and principle, community safety and community sovereignty. What are creative communities worldwide saying about the offer? That's the problem, Marie replied, showing communication logs from global creative districts. They're not asking for leadership decisions. They're making community decisions independently and asking us to support whatever choice we make for ourselves. The evolution was complete. Creative sovereignty had grown beyond requiring coordination from any central authority. Communities worldwide were capable of making independent decisions about their own survival and resistance. Then we make our choice, and they make theirs, and we trust that creative communities are strong enough to survive whatever consequences follow. At noon on what would become known as Creative Independence Day, I broadcast a message through the Global Creative Network that would either inspire the final victory of community sovereignty or mark the beginning of its systematic elimination. To creative communities worldwide, to the Global Stability Framework, and to everyone who believes that human creativity deserves freedom, we reject the terms being offered. We will not dissolve community-owned economic systems. We will not return to corporate or government control of creative activities. We will not accept regulations that make community independence illegal. The response from creative districts around the world was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of fear or uncertainty, communities reported unanimous support for resistance regardless of the consequences. The global stability framework has made a fundamental error in understanding what creative sovereignty means to people who have experienced both subjugation and freedom. They assume we value survival more than independence. They assume we will sacrifice principle for safety. Live footage from creative districts worldwide showed something unprecedented. Entire communities preparing for siege warfare with the same dedication that nations prepare for military defense, but using techniques developed through years of creative collaboration instead of traditional military training. What they fail to understand is that creative communities have already survived systematic attempts at destruction through corporate manipulation, government regulation, and economic strangulation. We have learned that survival without independence is not actually survival, it's just delayed elimination. The declaration of resistance triggered what historians would later call the Global Creative War. The first international conflict fought not over territory or resources, but over the right of communities to organize themselves independently of state and corporate control. The warfare was unlike anything in previous human experience. Instead of armies fighting armies, creative communities used artistic techniques to resist elimination while documenting and broadcasting their resistance to global audiences who became participants rather than observers. Asymmetric cultural warfare, reported Elena Rodriguez from the Barcelona Creative District, where community members had transformed their neighborhood into a fortress of cooperative defense. They have weapons and official authority. We have creativity, community solidarity, and global communication networks they can't control. The resistance techniques were revolutionary in their effectiveness. Musical compositions that coordinated defensive strategies. Visual installations that provided both physical barriers and psychological inspiration. Written communications that maintained community morale while exposing attacker tactics to international media. But the most powerful weapon is example, I realized, watching footage from communities that were not just surviving attacks but thriving under siege conditions. Every day we maintain community independence is proof that community independence is possible. The turning point came not through military victory but through economic collapse of the systems supporting elimination operations. The global stability framework had assumed that creative sovereignty was economically marginal and could be eliminated without significant consequences for global economic stability. They were catastrophically wrong. Global cultural industry collapse, Catherine reported, showing financial analyses that revealed the scope of their miscalculation. Entertainment, advertising, media, tourism, education, and technology sectors worldwide are experiencing simultaneous crashes as creative communities withdraw cooperation. The economic interdependence was more complex than anyone had understood. Creative communities didn't just produce artistic content. They provided the cultural foundation that supported entire economic sectors. Without creative community participation, vast portions of the global economy simply couldn't function. Stock markets worldwide have lost 30% of their value in 2 weeks. Consumer spending has collapsed as cultural products and experiences become unavailable. Advertising effectiveness has disappeared without creative content production. The elimination operations that were supposed to preserve economic stability were destroying economic stability more effectively than any previous crisis in modern history. The global stability framework is discovering that eliminating creative communities means eliminating the cultural creativity that global economic systems depend on to maintain consumer engagement and social stability. The surrender request from the Global Stability Framework arrived through official diplomatic channels, marked with the authority of international law and the desperation of economic collapse. Immediate cessation of elimination operations in exchange for restoration of creative community cooperation with global economic systems under terms that preserve community independence while ensuring international economic stability. The language was careful, but the meaning was clear. They were offering to recognize creative sovereignty in exchange for ending the economic warfare that community resistance had accidentally triggered. "They're not surrendering to our military capabilities," Marie observed, analyzing the diplomatic communications. "They're surrendering to our economic importance." But the most significant aspect of the negotiation was structural. Instead of negotiating with me as a leader of creative communities, international representatives wanted to negotiate with creative communities directly, acknowledging that community independence meant community self-representation. They've accepted that creative sovereignty is legitimate governance, I realized. Not just artistic independence, but political independence that requires diplomatic recognition. The Global Creative Sovereignty Accords were signed in Geneva 3 months after the elimination operations began, establishing creative communities as internationally recognized autonomous zones with the right to self-governance, economic independence, and cultural self-determination. Not just artistic freedom, Marie said, reading the treaty language that would reshape international law. Political sovereignty for communities organized around creative cooperation instead of geographic territory or ethnic identity. The precedent was revolutionary. For the first time in modern history, communities had achieved international recognition based on shared values and cooperative organization rather than traditional nation-state criteria. Creative districts worldwide are now legally equivalent to independent city-states with the right to establish their own economic systems, social policies, and cultural standards. But the most significant aspect of the accords was their expansion beyond creative communities. The principles of community sovereignty were being adopted by manufacturing cooperatives, agricultural communes, technology collectives, and social organizations that wanted to organize independently of corporate and government control. Creative sovereignty has become the template for comprehensive social independence, I realized. We didn't just win artistic freedom. We won the right for human communities to organize themselves according to their own values instead of external authority. Walking through the reconstructed Paris Creative District 6 months after the Global Creative Sovereignty Accords, I reflected on a journey that had transformed from personal survival to global revolution. The space around me bustled with activity that represented something unprecedented in human history. A community organized entirely according to principles of creative cooperation, economic equality, and cultural self-determination. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't signed Alexander's contract that night in Paris? Marie asked as we watched artists preparing for the evening performance festival that had become a celebration of community independence. I think about it constantly. But I've realized that the contract wasn't the beginning of this story. It was just the moment I became conscious of a story that was already in progress. The creative district represented more than artistic achievement or economic success. It represented proof that human communities could organize complex social systems without requiring either corporate exploitation or government control. The fashion industry corruption that seemed so overwhelming 3 years ago now looks like preparation for understanding and resisting much larger systems of control, I continued. Every betrayal taught us something essential about how power works and how independence can be achieved. Standing on the balcony of the community center that had replaced my old atelier, I could see similar creative districts in 12 other cities around the world, all connected through networks of cooperation that had evolved far beyond artistic collaboration. Global creative sovereignty has generated the largest peaceful social revolution in human history, Catherine observed, joining us for the evening celebration. 237 creative communities across 46 countries, all demonstrating that community independence produces higher levels of prosperity, social stability, and cultural achievement than traditional corporate or government organization. The statistics were undeniable. Crime rates, poverty levels, mental health issues, and social conflict had all decreased dramatically in creative sovereignty zones. Educational achievement, economic innovation, artistic production, and community satisfaction had all increased substantially. We didn't just prove that creative freedom was possible, I realized. We proved that human freedom was possible. As sunset painted the Paris Creative District in golden light, a message appeared on our community network that represented not a threat or challenge, but recognition of what had been achieved and acknowledgement of what would come next. The global creative sovereignty movement has successfully demonstrated that human communities can organize complex social, economic, and cultural systems independently of traditional corporate and government control. This achievement represents the most significant evolution in human social organization since the development of democratic governance. Creative communities worldwide have proven that cooperation, equality, and self-determination can produce higher levels of prosperity and stability than hierarchy, competition, and external authority. The question now is not whether community sovereignty is possible, but whether it can be scaled to transform global human social organization completely. Some people view this possibility as the fulfillment of human potential. Others view it as the end of necessary control systems. The next phase of human social evolution begins with the choice between expanding community sovereignty and preserving traditional authority structures. This choice will determine whether the future of human civilization is organized around freedom or control, cooperation or competition, community sovereignty or institutional authority. Congratulations on proving that another world is possible. Now the real work begins. Observers who understand that everything has changed forever. I looked around the thriving creative district, where thousands of people were living, working, and collaborating in ways that prioritized human creativity, community cooperation, and cultural self-determination over profit maximization, resource extraction, and social control. We had started with stolen fashion designs and built something that could reshape civilization itself. What happens next? Marie asked. Next, we find out whether the rest of humanity wants the freedom we've created, or whether they prefer the security of systems that make decisions for them. As community celebration filled the evening air with music, art, and the sounds of people who had chosen cooperation over competition, my phone buzzed with a message that suggested our victory was about to be tested on a scale we had never imagined. Global creative sovereignty has inspired similar movements in manufacturing, agriculture, technology, healthcare, education, and governance. Communities worldwide are withdrawing from corporate and government systems to establish independent cooperative organizations based on your model. Traditional institutions are experiencing systematic collapse as people choose community sovereignty over institutional authority. This is either the beginning of human liberation or the end of social stability. Either way, it cannot be stopped or controlled. The transformation is now autonomous and self-expanding. You have approximately 18 months to help guide this transition peacefully, or it will proceed through revolutionary disruption that could destabilize global civilization. The choice is not whether this transformation will happen. The choice is whether it happens through cooperation or conflict. Some changes are too large to control. You have initiated one of them. Someone who understands the magnitude of what you have unleashed. Looking out at the creative district that had started as my personal escape from fashion industry corruption and had become the template for global social transformation, I realized this had never been about fashion, art, or even creativity. This had been about whether human beings could learn to organize their societies around freedom instead of control, and we were about to find out whether the rest of the world was ready for that choice. Next episode preview. The creative sovereignty we built has inspired a global movement that's withdrawing from corporate and government systems to establish independent communities based on cooperation instead of control. Traditional institutions are collapsing as people choose freedom over security. But transformation on this scale doesn't happen peacefully unless it's guided carefully. The next 18 months will determine whether human liberation happens through cooperation or revolution, and the future of civilization might depend on whether a girl from Queens, who once just wanted to design beautiful dresses, can help guide the largest social transformation in human history. Everything we've built has led to this moment.